So before I speak about Visa and what we're doing, etc., I'm just going to bring the panelists on, if I may. Imran, sorry, I'm hoping that they'll actually take the cue. Yeah, let's see. Imran Gulamhuseinwala, Jaydev Janardhan, Kevin Hanley, Kirsty Rutter, and last but not least, Wang Li. I'll do the introductions of my guests in a minute, but just before that, since the subject is FinTech, I just want to say that, Visa, obviously I'm flying the flag here, but the first FinTech in the world probably was Visa. 60 years ago, we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of our creation on the September 18th this year. And we've always been a FinTech, and we've always been token first, and I'll speak to that in a second. But I think Barclays probably was the first FinTech in the UK 25 years ago with the creation of various things, which I'll let Kirsty speak about. But Visa has had a bunch of very interesting developments, both internally and with partners, and just two I'm going to touch on. So 6 years ago when I joined Visa, I joined the US group, which was set up to do innovation and strategic partnerships. And the idea was to do the partnerships that did not exist in Visa at that point of time. So we always had the big banks, obviously, as our very close clients and partners. But we did not have very much to do except in a sort of, touch it if it comes around fashion with the Apples and the Googles and the Squares and all the new people coming up. So in particular, that time Square, Jack Dorsey walked into Joe Saunders' office and held up that little device and said, Joe, I need your help to get some PCI compliance done, et cetera, et cetera. And Joe said, yep, absolutely. We put some money into that. And Square, since then, you all know the story, but it's one of the biggest merchants we have in the world now, probably third or fourth largest in total volume. What is more interesting with Square is that they really are, they've really developed a completely new acceptance segment. They've really opened up ways for people who earlier did not have the ability to accept payments to go out and do that very simply. And the other example I'd use in a similar vein would be Stripe more recently, who obviously focus on the whole developer community and who we have helped to become, give the ability to accept payments from people who develop a small app and need to get paid a few pounds, a few dollars, or a few shillings, or whatever it is, across the world, while sitting still in their Silicon Valley office in Seattle. So, long story short, we've always been FinTech, and we've always been focused on the FinTech area. In Europe, possibly, given the ownership that we had till recently in Europe, which was obviously the banks, our focus may not have been as sharp. But starting a few months ago, that has changed, and we are really now focusing in terms of what we can do with FinTech engagement in Europe. But I know you don't really want to hear about what we are doing. I think you want to hear all these super interesting panelists out here. I'm going to just start actually from that side, just to do it in the reverse order rather than me. But I'm going to introduce them and then ask them to say something about what they feel is going on in the FinTechs. But just the introductions first. Wang Li is the head of EMEA for the Ant Financial Group. You all know Alibaba, and this is one of their, there's the financial subsidiary. Wang Li has a very interesting background with McKinsey's. She's been, she has a bunch of experience in business, but most interesting, she's also an ice skating champion. So I was going to ask her to come on stage, given the snow outside, but maybe not today. Kirsty heads up she's the CIO for Barclays in the UK. She basically calls herself a matchmaker, basically looking at what Barclays as a business can do with the new technologies that are coming up. And she's super interested in figuring out where the matches work and how she can make it happen. Kirsty's worked with, I think, 5 or 6 major financial institutions, so she probably knows most of the audience here one way or the other. Kevin, and sorry, I should mention actually that Kirsty it was interesting, she was telling me that she likes to run away. Not so much from work, but apparently when she finished school, she ran away to Japan for 2 years without a word of the language. There you go. Kevin is the head of innovation in RBS. He is responsible for their solutions and sourcing of new technology, including their outpost in the Silicon Valley and Edinburgh here and a bunch of other stuff. I'll let Kevin speak to what he does and how he does, but he basically covers anything to do with innovation, and he covers the open banking agenda for RBS in the UK. Jaidev has the usual background that any Indian has, which is he's an engineering graduate with an MBA, because our parents don't allow us to do anything else. It's, you can either become a doctor or an engineer. He became an engineer. Then he went off, as we do, to the US, joined Cap One, and finally, Zopa as the CEO of Zopa. So very interesting background there. Not for Indians. I mean, we see this all the time, so it's a bit of a, again, one more. But it is interesting. So that's Jaidev. And then last but definitely not the least, Imran, who's just come back, he tells me, from nearly going off-piste on a skiing holiday. Nearly, not quite. But Imran, you all know. Imran is the implementation trustee for the Open Banking Implementation Initiative. And he has a huge list of things to his credit. He's the EY partner for FinTech globally, I believe. He also heads up the FinTech. He also heads up the financial services practice in the UK. He has an OBE. He's got a Cambridge degree. It's pretty boring when you keep doing all of that. But
it is in engineering as well.
And engineering as well. Thank you. That's it. Yeah, this sort of goes with the territory apparently. What we're going to do is just really. We really want, we were discussing earlier how we should do this, and we really want the audience to have a chance to raise some questions. So there's just going to be one question posed to each of my panelists here, which is, what single change have you seen from fintechs that really has impressed you and that you think is worth so bringing out to this audience, and where do you see that going next? I think we're going to take ask the horses first, which is the fintechs themselves. So I guess maybe, Jaidev, start with you, and then I'll ask Wang Li.
Thank you, Vish. So when I think about fintech, and I'm not talking about the oldest fintechs here, I'm talking about the companies that have come out in the last 15, 20 years that have used technology to really grow. And when I look at fintech and what those companies have done, I think the single most important change is probably bringing back customer centricity to financial services. These companies, to grow, they've used technology, but they've really created much superior customer value propositions to create, to get market share and to grow. And in doing so, I think they've really focused on three elements. One is value and access. I think the example of Stripe is a good one. The second is creating experiences that are actually instant and mobile enabled. And the third is creating a total package which leaves the customer a lot more satisfied with their engagement and actually engenders trust. And I'm going to use peer-to-peer lending, a business model that Zopa invented, to really make that more real, so to speak. So let's start with kind of value and access, right? So if you go today in the market and you're looking for a competitive borrower, and if you have a good credit history, Zopa is one of the most competitive rates that are available. If you're a small business owner and you actually want to go borrow, often the case would be that other peer-to-peer and fintech players would be far more competitive in terms of pricing and in terms of experience than banks. And if you happen to be having a damaged credit history near prime, then probably a fintech player is your only way to get access to financial services. So that's kind of value and access. And the way they have done that is really using technology to create a far leaner operating platform and a far more nimble organization that is able to serve these customers more efficiently. The second thing was, as I talked about, was about mobile and instant. Again, to give an example, if you happen to be on Money Supermarket, and again, a prime borrower, Zopa would actually pre-approve you while you don't even leave the Money Supermarket website, right? And we pioneered the idea of a fully online loan application in the UK. And today you can do that on mobile as well as you can do it on the internet. Now, this is something that most banks are still struggling to do. And that's something that customers love and actually drives growth. And again, the same can be said about some of the payment innovations that people like Alipay have done, which are, again, really centered around mobile, or Square, which is a great solution on acquiring, again, centered around a mobile device. The third is about that experience and trust. So if you look at net promoter scores for most financial services companies, the banks in general, in the UK, it barely makes it to be positive, right? So some banks have negative net promoter scores, and the average would be maybe in the teens. And if you look at fintechs, Zopa has a score of 75 net promoter score, which kind of puts it closer to some of the tech firms. And I think that's true about most successful fintech firms, is that their customers trust them and are willing to promote them. And again, that comes from creating an experience and a set of products that are simple to use, using technology, typically AI, and other things to actually give better self-service. And that drives that level of trust, right? So I think so. To summarize, the best thing I think fintech has done for the world is really bringing that customer centricity back. And that can be seen in the results, right? So if you look at peer-to-peer lending today and see the change it has delivered. In the UK, peer-to-peer lending in small business and consumer has been growing at more than 150% over the last 3 years annualized. If you look at the US, a third of personal loans made in 2017 were made through peer-to-peer platforms. If you look at China, there was about $500 billion of lending that peer-to-peer platforms did in the first half of 2017. That's real change, right? And to make sure that we maintain that, I think what we need to do is stay true to our core, right? So we need to make sure that we do not lose that customer centricity, and we hold on to that. But then do more with the trust that we have created, right? So we have created, through a set of products that are easy to use, a huge amount of customer trust. And I think the next challenge for us is really how do we take that and offer a wider set of services. I think people like Alibaba are kind of are blazing the way there in terms of offering more and more services on their platform. Zopa is launching a bank to actually enable their customers to have better products and a wider range of products from them. And in doing that journey, we need to make sure that we stay true to our focus on customer centricity. And the help we need from the environment is continuing policy help to actually lower some of the barriers to entry from a competitiveness standpoint. I think open banking initiative that Imran's leading has been brilliant because it actually gives us more data to use and actually compete with the banks more effectively. Some of the regulatory changes that have happened in the UK, both allowing the creation of a peer-to-peer ecosystem or some of the changes that are happening around capital, which allows challenger banks to compete more effectively with incumbents. These are great examples of things we need from the environment to continue to drive and grow and give better deals to UK and worldwide consumers.
Thanks a lot. Pretty comprehensive. From the other side of the world, but coming here soon, I guess, is Wang Li's opinion. I'd really be interested to, if you tell us what very briefly you've achieved in China, which is huge, but really how you see that coming to Europe.
Thank you very much for referring to Alibaba and Ant Financial so many times in your speech. Probably just for everyone here, one sentence to introduce Ant Financial very briefly before I answer your question. Ant Financial, we started as a payment company in China, but nowadays, Ant Financial is a conglomerate financial services company. We are a lifestyle super app in China with active users of more than 600 million. What I mean by active user is every user open the app and use it more than 7 times a day. So that is Ant Financial and Alibaba. Then go to answer your question directly, right? What I admire most about the people here, what FinTech has contributed to the global economy in the past 10 years is that we used FinTech as an entry point. And we use this lever to change the way people live in their daily life, right? Everyone here, we contribute to one angle or the other to improve the efficiency and customer experience, how consumers can use financial service sectors. However, let's all remember, financial service sector is only 17% of global GDP. So what we have achieved collectively together here is that we are starting to build an infrastructure, and on this infrastructure, all the other sectors in the global economy can contribute and can improve the world around us. For example, Ant Financial, we have a super app, and use this super app. In China, people can live with their phone with no wallet at all to travel within major cities for 7 days a week. And in Europe market, we hope Chinese tourists can at least using their phone travel around Europe with no wallet. A lot of things you can do on super app with the help from different players, right? You can call a taxi in the morning. You can call food deliveries. You can pay your utility bills. You can find out where is the best promotion going on for Harrods these days. All these, people services and products people need in their life in the current days. And looking into the future, I hope everyone here can not only improve the consumer experience and the financial sector contribution to the global economy. Beyond the economy, we can do something more broadly and more significantly. For example, when people talk about sustainability development, can we jointly do something together? And one interesting fact we found out in Alibaba, the second most used platform in Alibaba is actually Ant Forest. Ant Forest is a charity and sustainability development. For every transaction people did on the platform, we are calculating the points. When the points reach certain level, we will plant a tree in China, somewhere in China, right? But I'm sure there are some more interesting business models in global market. But hopefully, one day in the future, we can make the world a better place and a greener place too.
Well, thank you very much, and really interesting your definition of active users. It might be a bit different sometimes here. I mean, I've heard all sorts of definitions, including once a month maybe. Yeah, that's all right, we'll count that. But, it's the old model. Coming from the fintechs who are actually making the changes to the incumbents who are, one, fighting them, and two, trying to get with it themselves. I think, but the big advantage the incumbents obviously have is they have the customer base today. And it'd really be interesting to see how you see this all playing out.
Yeah, sure. So Vish mentioned already, we're over 325 years old, and we're still here. So we've been doing something right. And if anyone in Barclays has been on a panel in front of you, you've probably heard that line many times. There are two angles for us at Barclays, and they are both societal and engaging with the ecosystem. So we have RISE, for those of you who don't know, is in Shoreditch, just up the road, which is in the UK at least, the London home of FinTech, and that's our global innovation platform. And from there, we work with all levels of the FinTech, whatever FinTech really means, ecosystem, to help us get better at what we do. Because I think what's happened up until now is we've moved past the threat and the fear, and actually the challenge that the FinTech community has given us has energized our business and forced us to reconsider our operating model and get smarter at what we do, and I think that's been great, frankly. And then from a societal point of view, there are initiatives such as Eagle Labs, and you'll have seen Life Skills, where from a UK population point of view, we're trying to help the broader community. And I think from where does this take us in the future, I think there's more of that to do. I think there's a lot of work to do on the ethical side, and there's been much debate around that, and I'm sure there'll be much of that over the next couple of days. But for Barclays, being a bank is to drive societal prosperity, to take the nation and more broadly the population forward. And we can't do that on our own. We're not that arrogant. And so we are working together with the partners that we can find who want to work with us and help us adapt, and us to learn from them, and us to teach others. And that's the way I hope it moves forward.
Great. Kevin?
Okay, so I think the question of the panel is what does technology deliver to banking today, and what does the future look like? Just very quickly on what I think technology has delivered to date. I think the business of banking has been reimagined over the last 10 years. I think we as an industry have reimagined how banking services are provided over the last 10 years. I think that's delivered through technology that becomes faster, it becomes cheaper, it becomes more ubiquitous, and customer behaviors change, and they expect deep personalization and they expect instant gratification. And we all see that. We all see that every day through the migration of banking services from our branches to the web and in particular to mobile. And I think it's really easy to underestimate I guess the amount of change over the last 10 years. We see something like 20 times more digital interactions now than through our branches, and 85% of, I guess, what we could do in a branch can be done on a mobile at the moment. So fundamental change that I think we underestimate in terms of what technology's delivered to the industry to date would be my summary on what technology's delivered so far. I think if you look into the future, I'll give you two thoughts on where I think it heads. I think we continue to see the evolution of how banking services are provided moving forward. We within RBS see the convergence of where artificial intelligence and data and voice in particular come together again to reimagine the way that banking services are provided. We're doing an awful lot of work around what we call zero UI and thinking about emotionally intelligent digital humans and how they might change, for example, the way that banking services are provided moving forward. So I think you see the continued evolution of how services are provided. But my overwhelming thought on the future is, having spent the last 10 years thinking about how services are provided, I think my thesis for the next 10 years is that as an industry we need to spend much more time on what services are provided and be much more innovative around the what as well as the how. And I think we are at the vanguard of. I think the industry is ripe for a whole new era of customer-centric, customer-led design moving forward. I think there's a generational lag in the products that we provide as an industry. I think we've done a good job of digitizing products when we lived in a world where we had one job and 2.2 kids and cars and houses. I think the products need rethinking, and they need rethinking in a customer-centric way. So we've innovated the how, we need to innovate the what moving forward.
Thanks a lot. I mean, we're sort of slightly going out of time, but Imran's view, hopefully the unbiased, neutral view between the two platforms is going to be really interesting, and how you see this whole thing playing out.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think what impact has FinTech had is it's challenging a fundamental assumption on the industry structure of financial services. I think there's also something to do with the customer as well, which I'll touch on in a second. But the financial services has historically essentially been a utility-based sector where you've got a small number of players that are providing largely homogeneous products. And what the fintechs have really demonstrated is actually that as a new entrant, you can come into a market, you can provide a proposition. The barriers to entry are sufficiently low now, partly because of technology, but also because of regulation and the flow of capital and so on, that you can actually challenge some of these established ways of doing things. And so the question in my mind is, does fintech actually demonstrate to us that this entire industry, this entire sector, is on a transition away from utility and to becoming something that looks more akin to other sectors that we see in the economy, whether it's retail or technology, I'm not entirely sure. And of course, for that to continue to happen, we do still need to see capital coming into the sector. We need to see the kind of business formation that we've seen, and actually the UK really is a fantastic example of how that can work. Going forward, we do need exits. Exits are really important to recycle that capital pool and then enable new companies to come to market. So that's one bit, and I think if you really roll that forward, an industry sector that does move from utilities to something that's much more open is not just going to be about smaller fintechs coming in, but I really do anticipate non-financial services incumbents coming into the space, whether they're mobile phone operators or pure tech companies or actually insurance companies coming into banking and vice versa. All those lines I really do think are going to blur. But then the second point I think that fintech has really demonstrated to us is that actually the customer propositions are changing, and many of the panelists have talked about this. And in my mind, the problem with the utility structure that I think we're migrating away from, that's my thesis, is essentially that you had many, many parts of society that were underserved and overpriced. Whether they are individuals that were essentially financially excluded or just getting a bad deal or using too much foreign exchange or so on, or you have SMEs that are just awkward to deal with. All of these customers are getting a better deal, I think, from fintechs, not necessarily because the fintechs are now serving all of them, but their laser-like focus has actually been adopted by many of the incumbents. So actually the consumer does benefit across all of this. And we are beginning to see it. So we have tried to measure adoption. Adoption is really hard in these kind of fast evolving sectors. But when I looked at this back in 2015, it was kind of like 1 in 7 consumers were customers of fintechs. And we did the research last year. We actually asked consumers themselves, and we found that it was 1 in 3 globally were active users of fintechs. Now I'm embarrassed about that. Yeah, we even found that super users accounted for something like 13%, but our super users was someone who used 5 fintechs over the course of the last 6 months. So the 7 a day that's a fantastic metric. But when I do look at the UK as well, the UK for developed markets, and developed markets are incredibly different from fast developing markets, that's probably the best way of putting it, we're at 42%. So the UK is actually a great story in terms of customer adoption. And interestingly, you don't just see that in fintech, you see it in e-commerce and lots of other new technologies, new business models. The Brits do like it, so we're seeing a lot of activity here. And I do agree, we're at the vanguard.
Fabulous. We are sort of, I'm trying to figure out if I can see the clock, which is placed just where I can't see it, so it's very good. But we've got time for questions from the audience. And in the meantime, though, I have one for the incumbent banks, for Kirsty and Kevin, which is, when you wake up in the morning, what's the news you don't want to see that the fintechs have been doing?
You can tell, I was going to say, you can tell we weren't prepped for that one, can't you? That we don't want to see that they've been doing.
Well, something that...
No, I generally like surprises because it keeps us on our toes. What I get most upset about is when another incumbent beats us to something that we thought we were being brilliant at, and then it just shows that we were being a little bit slow to market and probably caught up in ourselves a little bit. But I think the bigger agenda for us as an organization, and more broadly, if I look at Barclays within the UK, is that whole societal banking of everybody. And I don't think it's us or them, I think it's a collective, because we have to do it together.
Kevin, any thoughts?
It's a similar kind of answer. I don't get concerned with what I read in the paper, but oftentimes what you read in the paper is a catalyst to provoke similar kind of thinking internally to see how you respond to the Amazon announcement. I think the other day was an example which provoked a whole load of conversation in our organisation. So I'm not sure it's necessarily something that you get concerned about, but you do need to react to it.
And just flipping that question around to the fintechs here, but what keeps you awake at night? What's the big fear? And I'll start, I think, with Wang Li.
So I talk about the point about infrastructure, about the collective effort, right? So the least thing I want to see on the newspaper about fintech is something is going against this direction. For example, right, some player shows certain gestures, want to dominate the market and create unfair competition landscape in the market. That's something I don't want to see, right? We want everyone in the global economy to invest in this sector. We want to attract all the support from all the governments around the world to further support the development of the sector. So anything against globalization, anything against a collective team effort, I will tend to believe that's set us back quite a few years back. Yeah.
Jaydev mentioned to me that his speciality when he was young was answering in mime. So perhaps.
I won't try that here. That's something you don't want to see. But what I would like to see is actually more innovation from the incumbents, because I think we can't drive all this change ourselves, and the more we can lead the change with others following is actually very heartening. What I don't like to see is lobbying against great initiatives like open banking or fear-mongering that actually starts to increase barriers to competition or puts regulation where it's not helpful for the customer. What I also don't like to see is, I would say, behavior that puts the customer trust that we have created as FinTech, as an industry, at risk. So if there are other players in the market, be that in incumbents or in our space, who are putting that customer trust at risk, then that creates a bigger problem for the industry. And that's another thing that I kind of worry about. But to the extent more of our innovation is followed or actually bettered, I think that's good for everyone.
Sounds great. I think we're more or less running out of time, but just to summarize, I don't think there's anything you've heard today that is different from what you already know and have been working with, which is, the basic principles. All of these, whether it's an incumbent or whether it's a fintech or whether it's a very large company like Alibaba that's now entering the financial service or has entered it, or the neutral view of the open banking trustee. It's customer centricity. I think all of you have spoken about that. It's driving efficiency. Whether it is overpriced and underserved customers, as a few of you mentioned, and I guess it's value addition and differentiation, all of them driven through technology. So I think that basically is the message, and I hope you have a great time for the rest of the 2 days. I've certainly enjoyed this. We've got a fabulous panel here, so if you can give a hand to them, thank you very much. Thank you.